Hello everyone. Today's topic is explicit versus implicit transactions. In PostgreSQL, we have two types of transactions. First one is explicit. Those are the transactions that we start and complete explicitly. And there's an implicit one. Those are the transactions that get executed by PostgreSQL without us explicitly doing so. Let's see an example and it's going to make more sense. First, we're going to see an example of explicit transaction. As we said, those are the transactions that we start explicitly, and later on we complete it by calling a commit or a rollback. So let's see an example. Here we have a begin statement, and as we know, begin or a begin transaction, those are the same started transaction. So everything that follows the begin is going to be a part of that transaction. So next, we're going to execute the insert statement. And I'm sure you're familiar with an insert statement, although the last part here might be new to you. It says returning txid current. As you know, insert as well as update is a write operation. Same goes for delete. Right? And write operations usually, well, write the data, right? They don't necessarily return anything back. But in PostgreSQL, we can also return some values back. Let's say you inserted a new row and you want an ID of that newly inserted row. Then, using the returning keyword, you can do that. In this case, we are returning back a txid underscore current function value. And what this function does, it's a special function which gives you back the ID of currently running transaction. So don't get confused with the name. TX stands for transaction and ID current, well, current ID. So to recap, this insert statement inserts a new row in a labels table with a value of feature, and in the same statement returns back currently running transaction ID. So let's see what it gives us back. It gives us transaction ID. We already saw in a previous video it's going to be a unique number. In this case, it turns out to be 1086. Next, we're going to do the same. This time, we're just going to insert a different value, right? And we see that transaction ID for this insert statement, so the transaction that this insert statement was executed, is the same as the one that was executed before, which makes sense because we explicitly start the transaction and we know that whatever follows the begin or begin transaction SQL statement gonna be part of the transaction. And here's the proof for that. ID of both of the transaction ID for both of the insert statements is the same. Now we saw example of an explicit transaction, right? So now what happens if we don't start transaction explicitly, right? So if we never execute the begin keyword, what happens then? Let's see. So here we are just executing again exact same insert statement, but this time without first explicitly starting a transaction. And turns out that whenever you do that, whenever you execute an SQL statement outside of an explicit transaction, which we are doing it right now, then PostgreSQL gonna automatically, or rather implicitly, gonna start a transaction and execute your SQL statement in that transaction. So when you execute this insert statement, what happens under the hood is this. PostgreSQL starts a transaction, then it executes whatever your statement is, and then it commits a transaction. So in this case, we can see that ID of a transaction is a different one, right? And we also see that this statement was executed inside the transaction. Otherwise, we would not have any transaction ID, right? So what happens if we execute a second insert statement now? Well, same thing happens. PostgreSQL sees that this insert statement is executed outside of an explicit transaction, so it's gonna always execute such statements in an implicit transaction. So same thing happens here. PostgreSQL wraps this statement in a begin and a commit, and we see in the end that this insert statement was indeed executed, first of all, in a transaction, and secondly, in a different transaction. Because as you can see, the ID of this transaction is not the same as the ID of a previous insert statement, right? So that was all. It's a rather simple concept in PostgreSQL. Just to recap, now we know that every statement that we execute in PostgreSQL will be executed in an implicit transaction if it's not part of an explicit transaction. So in the next video, we're going to talk about sub-transactions or transactions inside transactions. That's a very interesting topic, and see you guys there. Thank you.